Hey guys, Kevin Cleary here with a knife video for you. If you're noticing the jacket, I'm not trying to make this video any more formal. It's a little cool in here, so I threw a sports jacket on. I usually have a couple on a hanger here in my office. It's just a matter of comfort more than style. Now, let's go ahead and share with you the knife that we have today. This is the Stedemon, well, it's a Stedemon knife, but it's called a Zone Knives Company ZKC D01. Okay, if you, I'm not sure how the whole relationship works, if one is a subdivision of the other or what. If you look on, say, Blade HQ or different websites, you'll see these listed under the Stedemon knives. But it does say the ZKC D01 on the blade, and then it says a Stedemon design. So I'm not sure what's going on with the names. However, I am sure about what's going on with this knife, and I gotta say, from just a design standpoint, this is a knife that checked a lot of boxes for me, right? It's nice and big. It's got that choil, which I really like on a large knife. It really allows you to get up and get some control. And I like the look of this with the layered G10. So for me, it checked a lot of boxes. It was kind of a no-brainer in terms of whether or not to pick this one up. And now that I've had quite a bit of time with it, in fact, this is a review that I wanted to do quite some time ago, but I just haven't been able to get around to it. So I'm squeezing this in today when I actually have another video I hope to finish. So let's go ahead and get into the size and weight, and then we'll move over to the tabletop. So this is a nice big knife at 9 and just over 9 1/8, 9 3/16. The blade length is basically 4 inches, just a little shy of 4 inches, and the handle is just a little over 5 inches. Okay, so that's how, in fact, it's 5 3/16, which is kind of where that 3/16 comes from, at least on this one. It's pretty thin, so it carries quite nicely at just under half an inch, and I mean just under, like, you know, maybe a 32nd under or even less than that. And it only weighs 5.15 ounces. Now, I think that's a pretty good weight for this knife. Now, the only drawback about the size and weight on this is that it's a little blade heavy, okay? And the reason for that is that the handle is very lightweight. Okay, so it's just G10 on this side. There is a nested liner on this side that allows for the lock. But that makes this knife nice and lightweight, or the handle nice and light. Overall, it makes the knife overall fairly lightweight, but the handle is where they've made that up. So the blade is just a teeny bit blade heavy, or the knife is just a teeny bit blade heavy, and that to me is not a big deal. In fact, you know, I know a lot of guys in videos talk about balance on knives. I don't talk about it because I literally don't care, okay? I have never in my life been using a knife and thought, wow, because this is too front heavy or back heavy, I just can't get done the cutting task that I want to get done. So let's move on to some of the details on this, and for that, we'll see you over at the tabletop. Okay guys, so here we are with a closer look at this Stedemon or Zone Knife Company D01. We will go ahead and start with the blade the way that we always do. This is kind of an interesting blade because, you know, at first glance you want to call it a drop point, but there is a clip here. You can see if I show you there carefully. So it's kind of a clip point that, for all intents and purposes, looks and acts like a drop point. So 440C steel here, satin finish on the grinds and on the swedge here, and then stone washed on the flats and on the spine of the knife. Nice thin edge geometry, lots of cutting edge, and sort of a gentle belly. I gotta say, I really like this blade shape, not only for the way it looks, but also just in terms of a sort of general utility cutting blade. This performs really well. 440C is the steel on this one, and would I like to see a slightly better steel on this? Yes. Can I really complain about that at the price point? No. In fact, even at much higher price points, you know, there's a lot of Bokers out there that go for between $150 and $200 that have 440C. Now, let me add that in terms of performance, I actually really like 440C, and if you're wondering about it, go ahead and watch the birdshot video I'll put a link in the description below to their video where they do a cut test with 440C, checking out the performance. It does really, really well. Okay, so I can attest from my own experience to the fact that 440C works well. It's not as good as say 154CM or S30V or something like that, but it's a very respectable steel, okay? So I can't really hit the knife too much for the steel choice, especially at the price point. All right, now there is an upgraded version of this before we go much further. And if you go looking for these like on Blade HQ or Knife Center or something, you'll see that there's an expensive one with higher end materials, okay? Now, the only other thing that I really have to say about this blade is that it's fairly, well, how do I put this? Again, yeah, I feel like I've talked about this in every video and I'm kind of beating a dead horse here, but this blade is a very good combination. In fact, better than the last couple of knives I've reviewed at getting a nice strong blade. Look at, you've got quite a bit of thickness here, even out toward the tip. This is a fairly robust blade, but you've got nice thin edge and a nice high grind. See how high that grind is? So, you know, if you're gonna go with a flat grind, now I prefer, and you guys know this, if you've got a thick blade stock, I prefer a hollow grind because it gives you better cutting, better slicing performance. If you're gonna go with a flat grind, it needs to be a high flat grind, okay? That's the way you can kind of thin that out enough at behind the edge to get a knife that still cuts well, even though it's got fairly thick blade stock, and this one definitely does. The other thing I want to point out about this blade is I really like the look of these swedges at the top, but they're not so aggressive, they're not so steep that they've significantly thinned the top of the knife. Why is that important? Well, because now I can get my finger in the choil and I can get my thumb up here, and I've got full width all the way up to here on the blade. So that gives me a really comfortable place to rest my thumb if I'm doing detailed work. And a lot of knives, and you guys have probably heard me talk about this before, a lot of knives will put a swedge up here that's quite thin, and I mean often it looks really, really nice, but then when you go to put your finger on the back of the blade, you realize this is actually quite sharp and uncomfortable. This one, not so. Nice thick blade stock, and that blade stock is not thinned out too much by the top swedge. The top swedge looks good and it's well done with that satin grind, but it doesn't take away from the thickness of the blade enough that it makes it uncomfortable, which I think is an important consideration if you're designing a knife. Let's move on now to lockup and deployment. This knife, you can see, nice big pivot screw there, and it is just a slot, which is really nice. You can adjust this with a penny, or I've actually used I carry, hold on, see if I've got it really close by. I don't. I carry a pry tool on my keys though. You've probably seen in other videos, and it fits in there really nicely. So you can easily adjust this. The bearing, it is on bearings, and it is nice and free. Notice how it will drop really smoothly or really nicely, but I can't say that this is the smoothest knife. If I take it with two hands like this, sorry, and I move it, I can feel the ball bearings rolling in there, okay? And so when we talk about smooth, we mean that you can't feel that. It just feels like a smooth, glassy surface. In this case, the smoothness is not quite there. You can feel those ball bearings rolling around as you move the knife, okay? Now, in regular use, even when I flip the knife out, it does flip extremely well, okay? But even when I flip the knife out, in my hand that I'm holding the knife in, I can feel that there's a little bit of movement in there in terms of those ball bearings, okay? So smoothness is not amazing. However, in terms of the friction between the blade and the handle, that's done really, really nicely. The flipping action is very good. The detent is strong enough, okay, that you can't shake this blade out. And that's a little more important on a liner lock, right? Remember, I can't apply any pressure to this lock. It's not a frame lock. And so the tension on that bar has to be set right, and the detent has to be set right, because I'm gonna have no influence over it. So that part is done really well. And this is a knife, I've got to say, that the lock, what stands out to me about this is the comfort of it. Okay, the lock bar is easy to access. I've got lots of space. I can easily get purchase on it and push it over. The flipper is nice and accessible, and I can flip it without, there's no, what would you say, there's no abrasion to my fingers. This is a knife that if you like to play with your knives, you could flip this all day and not have any sort of that finger soreness that you sometimes get from certain knives that have maybe a stiffer detent or more aggressive jimping on the flipper tab. So in terms of lockup and deployment, it's good in terms of it being very functional. Yeah, I got that nice sunbeam coming into my picture here. It's been an overcast day all day, and of course it just decides to shine for a couple of minutes between the clouds there. There we go, it's gone. Anyway, so in terms of lockup and deployment, it is very, very functional. Okay, it flips nicely. Everything works very comfortably and smoothly. It flips quickly. It doesn't care whether you push button or whether you light switch, it's going to flip out every time, and that's a nice thing to have. You know, I have a few flippers that they're not as consistent as that, so I appreciate the consistency on the action here, and I appreciate the comfort. Now, both of those things are carried off. Sometimes a knife that flips really well and is really easy to open will get a little bit sort of loosey-goosey in there. Not a bit of blade play on this, which again is really nice. Now let me say this, I did have to take out the screws here and put a little bit of Loctite on there to keep the knife set right at the spot that I wanted it to be, where, you know, it's nice and solid, no side to side play at all, but it's also nice and smooth in terms of the action. All right. What about the handle? Well, the handle on this is one of the things that I really like about it. So you got that nice blue and black layered G10. I find it to be very attractive. If you turn it this way, you can see that that G10 goes all the way. There's a G10 backspacer in here. Now, it would have been a neat feature to see this and the backspacer all one piece. So this side scale with the backspacer, but you can see pretty clearly where they've glued and screwed this in, okay? One thing I will say is a nice feature is these pocket clip screws are screwing into the metal nested liner there. I gotta say that's definitely a win. Okay, so in terms of the construction, it's quite solid. No issues with that whatsoever. By the way, this is a nice thick piece of G10, so if you watch me here, as I squeeze, notice that I'm not getting any movement, okay? And this is not always the case. There are a lot of G10 framed knives that I have where I can get a little bit of movement out of them. Not so with this one. It's really, really strongly built, really thick contoured G10. Traction is achieved with these line patterns here. So let me bring this up so you can get a good look at it. See the lines that are milled in here? They're very grippy. They're not maybe as grippy as, say, a cold steel, but they are very positive. So when you get a hold of this knife, you've really got a hold of it. One complaint I will say about that is they do continue that line pattern right under the pocket clip, which means that it binds a little when you're getting this in and out of your pocket, and that's not that awesome, okay? It would have been nice to see them flatten this out a little bit, especially, you know, you've already got a handle here that has different patterns on it. So, you know, you could have just slightly altered this line pattern and left a little bit of a flat spot under the pocket clip. Not the end of the world, and this is not as bad. You know, if you've got some cold steels or some other knives that have really aggressive G10, this is not as aggressive as that. So it's not as bad as some knives out there, but would have been a nice touch to see that smoothed out under the clip. Nice big lanyard hole. And so let's see, are there anything else that is an issue here or that I want to point out to you? I think that's pretty well all for the handle. Let's bring in some comparisons. So this is a fairly budget-friendly flipper with medium materials, or maybe even budget materials. And so what have we got that compares to that? Well, I think there's an obvious comparison to the Rat Model 1. Of course, the Rat 1 is much cheaper, doesn't have all the features, doesn't have the size, and I honestly will say I like the design on the Stedman quite a bit better, but functionally and in terms of being very budget friendly, the Rad is a pretty good comparison. Moving sort of, actually let's pull in two that are in around the same price point for a minute. So the CRKT home front is around the same price. These come in about $65, $75. And that's where these are landing now on some websites. There's still a couple that are charging, you know, 100 or 115, but a number of websites have adjusted their price to be what I think is more reasonable on these. So the home front compares fairly well. I don't think in terms of construction, the home front is quite there. And of course the size is not the same either. So if you're looking at a larger knife, we've got a couple that compare. Before we get to that though, actually let's do that. You have one, the Liang Ma eraser, very similar in size, actually has a little more cutting edge, really interesting blade shape, very ergonomic. This knife I would say compares fairly well to this one. Now it is Aussate steel, and 440C I feel like is a little better. However, CRKT tends to do a really good job with their Aussate. So at least in my experience, compared to say a Rat Model 1 or even Cold Steel's Aussate, CRKT for me has had a little better edge retention on it. Now if you like a flipper with this design but would like to go to something a little more high-end with a little better fit and finish and quality, the Lion Steel Kerr is a great option. Again, this knife is one that I really like. It flips hard and fast. It's extremely comfortable in hand. It carries really well. And the attention to detail is really off the charts on this one. So that may be something to consider for you. Another knife that sort of falls into a similar category with the Contour G10 is the Zero Tolerance 0200. Now this is discontinued, but it is a nice big flipper. The steel is 154 cm, which is going to be a little bit better. Of course, very robust construction, but this knife is 2 ounces heavier. So this is a big, bulky knife. This is going to be much more comfortable to carry. There is one last knife I want to show you if you like something big and slim and blue. Got to pull in the Broken Skull. Broken Skull here, great knife, around the same price point, although it does have better steel and the triad lock, which is going to be really strong for you. Plus, the extremely thin profile on this means that it's very comfortable to carry. Not that this one is uncomfortable to carry, but you've got a very slim, very lightweight knife in the Broken Skull. Okay, so there you go, guys. Those are some comparisons that you may want to think about, and it'll also help you get a sense for the size of this knife. Notice pretty well every one of those was smaller than this. Overall, guys, I think this is actually a win. You know, it's budget friendly, it's well constructed, it's easy to carry, it's got a very ergonomic handle, very comfortable, very capable knife. Really no big issue here that causes me any kind of concern. So if you like carrying a knife this big and if you're drawn to this design, there are a number of, by the way, different options, which is I think one of the things I didn't talk about, but you can get a bunch of different colors, even the Jade G10 in this. So if you missed out on the M4 Para 2, maybe this can be your consolation prize. Anyway, yeah, if you like the design and if you like carrying a larger knife the way I do, I don't think you're going to go wrong with this Stedemon ZKC. We'll talk to you soon. Hope you enjoyed it.